Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to make sure 2 housekeeping rules: that you sign in, and also that your phones are on silent. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Perry. I'm the acting chief of the Census Bureau's Public Information Office. I'd like to welcome everyone who's viewing today's webcast. Today we have subject matter experts who will be discussing our preparations for the 2020 census and the 2015 National Content Test. So here's our program for today's news conference. First, our director, John Thompson, will give opening remarks. Then our subject matter experts will present plans for testing possible 2020 census question wording on within household coverage, relationship, and race ethnicity. Finally, we'll take questions and answers after the presentation. We'll take questions from people in the room and then from those on the phones. If you're calling in on the phone, please be sure to let the operator know that you have a question so that he or she can put you into the queue. As a reminder, you can go to our website, www.census.gov, and get information on this press conference, as well as the slides from our presenters. If you have questions, please feel free to call the Public Information Office. That number is 301-763-3030. Without further delay, let me present the Census Bureau's director, John Thompson.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Welcome to my Census Bureau colleagues, our stakeholders, and members of the media. And I'm extremely pleased to open this briefing. And since we have quite a bit to say today, my remarks will be very brief. But this fall, we will be, or next fall rather, we will be doing a national content test. In this test, as was mentioned, we will test questions on collection of race and ethnicity, relationship, and how to improve the accuracy of the population on our questionnaire. And when you think about it, this is a really, really important endeavor, because the data that we collect in the 2020 census will be what we have to use for small areas through the year 2030 when we do the next census. So this is a very important endeavor. We're really excited about it. I think you'll find that we're doing some really interesting things in our testing. And without further ado, I would like to listen to the presentations, and I'll introduce Jennifer Reichert.
Good afternoon. I want to join the director in thanking you all for coming out to hear about our plans for continued testing next year in preparation for the 2020 census. As some of you might know, we just had our quarterly program management review on Friday, where we released exciting news about the tests that are upcoming in the spring of 2015, both in Maricopa County, Arizona, as well as the Savannah market areas, which includes counties in both Georgia and South Carolina. The test you're going to hear about today is later in 2015 and is the continuation of our ongoing testing activities to research innovative methods for reducing the cost of the 2020 census while maintaining our commitment to a high-quality census. So our briefing today will cover this agenda. First, I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the 2015 National Content Test. And then we'll have a few different subject matter expert speakers who will come up and talk about the key content testing that will take place in this test. Eli Poehler will talk about the content related to within household coverage. Rose Kreider is going to cover our testing of the relationship question. And Nicholas Jones will close out with discussion of the testing related to race and Hispanic origin. And then, as Mark mentioned, we will have a Q&A session afterwards. The 2015 National Content Test, as I said, will take place in the late summer of 2015 with a census day of September 1st, 2015. Our specific sample designs for the test are still under development, but the test will use a nationally representative sample, including Puerto Rico, with oversampling of key population groups. As I mentioned, the key content testing that will take place in this test is related to within household coverage, relationship, and race and Hispanic origin. However, the test will also include some continued testing, building on what we've learned in both 2014 and what we will learn in the spring of 2015, about contact strategies that we use to optimize and maximize self-response, particularly through the internet, as we know that these will be very key to our cost savings in 2020. For this test in 15, mostly our strategies are going to be related to the timing and format of our mailings and our reminders. Now I'd like to introduce Eli Poehler, who's going to cover the content research for within household coverage.
A major component of the census is to determine how many people live in each housing unit in the country. The Census Bureau has established a rule to determine where a person should be counted, especially if they have more than one place they are living or staying. For the purpose of the census, we count a person where he or she lives and sleeps most of the time. When respondents complete the census, we must explain who should be counted in their household. In the 2010 census, we used a rules-based approach to explain who to count. We presented a list of instructions to the respondent that included some examples, such as how to count college students or how to count someone living with them temporarily. We then asked the respondent to apply these instructions to their household to determine how many people were living there. This is an example of the rules-based approach that was used in a previous test. Respondents were instructed to count people where they live and sleep most of the time. These instructions were followed by examples of who to include and not include in the household count. The respondent was then asked to provide the total household count based on their interpretation of the rule and examples. In the 2015 test, we are planning to test the rules-based approach, but also an alternative approach. We will test what we call a question-based approach, in which we ask guided questions based on the rule and examples to elicit a household roster. The intent is to take the burden of interpreting the instructions off of the respondent and allow us to apply the rules based on responses to guided questions. After asking the respondent who usually lives or sleeps at the housing unit, we'll ask questions to identify potentially missing people, such as babies, relatives, or people with no permanent place to live. We will also ask questions to determine if anyone who was listed sometimes lives somewhere else. This includes questions about college students, people with vacation or second homes, people in nursing homes, and those in the military, for example. With this approach, the respondent isn't asked to provide a total household roster count, but rather the population for the household is calculated from the final roster. In this test, we will compare the rules-based approach to the question-based approach and assess the accuracy of the two approaches through a re-interview. Now Rose Kreider will discuss the relationship question.
Thank you, Eli. The Census Bureau is constantly working to improve measurement. Let me just provide a short summary of the years of work we've already done on improving estimates from the relationship question. We've participated along with some 20 other federal agencies as part of the interagency group led by the Office of Management and Budget. That group is called Measuring Relationships in Federal Household Surveys. As part of that group, the Census Bureau conducted focus groups and cognitive testing to explore ways to improve estimates of same-sex couples. Over several years of work, we developed a revised relationship question. Since the June 2013 Supreme Court decision on the Defense of Marriage Act, there is an increased need for estimates of same-sex married couples for federal agencies who administer programs that depend on marital status. Throughout the process, the Census Bureau has been in conversation with other countries who already have very similar questions in use. We've been testing the new question wherever we can in smaller scale surveys, but the 2015 content test will be our first chance for a much larger scale test. Here you see the relationship question that was used in Census 2010. The red boxes highlight the two categories that are revised in the newly developed question. This is the revised relationship question that will be tested in the 2015 content test. As you can see highlighted in the red box, unmarried partner has been moved to the top of the list along with spouse. In addition, we now list the type of couple specifically, whether they're an opposite sex or same-sex couple, and whether they're married. So that gives you a very quick overview of what we're testing in 2015. If you'd like to see the earlier research that we've done on this topic, please go to the same-sex couples web page on the Census Bureau website. And now I'll turn it over to Nicholas Jones.
Thank you, Rose. I'm pleased to update all of you this afternoon on our mid-decade research and our testing plans for race and ethnicity. Many of you are familiar with the extensive research that we conducted during the 2010 census as part of the alternative questionnaire experiment research on race and Hispanic origin. But for those who are not, I'll take a couple minutes to talk with you about that research and to go over some of the highlights and the main findings for what we refer to as the AQE. After that, I'll update you on some of the outreach information that has been conducted over the past couple years, and I'll talk with you about the stakeholder engagement discussions we've been involved in. Then I'll present an overview of the key dimensions that we're testing in the 2015 census test in our mid-decade research, specifically some of the question formats that we're testing and examining in this research. Finally, I'll talk about the timeline that we have for the 2020 census in terms of determining content. The 2010 AQE was the most comprehensive research effort ever undertaken by the Census Bureau. It was comprised of three main components: a 500,000 household sample for mail-out, mail-back questionnaires, a telephone re-interview with 1 in 5 of those households to do further probing and re-interview questions, and a series of 67 focus groups with over 800 people across the United States, including parts of Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. Now, we want to ensure that everyone has a high-level understanding of the experimental research approaches that we took in the 2010 AQE, both to provide context for the results, as well as the foundation for the research that we're undertaking this decade and exploring now. Here on the screen, the image on the left presents one of the example approaches we took for testing two separate questions on race and origin. The image on the right presents one of the examples that we tested for a combined question on race and ethnicity. This basic conceptual comparison is what we'd like you to keep in mind as we move forward. The AQE research sought to understand how and why respondents identified themselves in different ways and in different contexts. We tested different questionnaire strategies with 4 goals in mind: increasing reporting in the race and ethnic categories identified by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, decreasing non-response, increasing the accuracy and the reliability of the results, and eliciting detailed responses for all racial and ethnic communities, for example, Chinese, Mexican, Jamaican, Lebanese, etc. The results of the AQE supported all of these objectives, and additionally, many individuals across communities liked the combined question approach as they felt it presented equity and balance to all the different categories. Some of the main findings from the 2010 AQE include: combining race and Hispanic origin into one question did not reduce the proportions of Hispanics, Blacks, American Indians and Alaska Natives, Asians, or Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders. One of the most notable findings was that while the separate questions approach still had some other race reporting as high as 7%, the combined question designs yielded a substantially reduced proportion of some of the race, under 0.5%. And white dropped to levels reflecting the non-Hispanic white population that we see traditionally in 2 separate question approaches, like the 2010 census. Overall, when a Hispanic category is provided as a response option within the combined question approach, some of the race becomes one of the smallest response groups, demonstrating that a combined question is more in line with how Hispanic respondents view themselves. Another major finding was that the combined question yielded lower item non-response rates than the 2 separate questions approach. The combined question increased reporting of detailed responses for most groups, but decreased reporting for others. The combined question better reflects self-identity. The re-interview study and the focus group research that we conducted confirmed these reporting patterns were a closer reflection of how individuals self-identify. Across the focus groups, participants commented that all race and ethnic groups were not treated equally in the 2010 census and felt that all groups should be treated fairly and equitably across the board. Finally, one common theme from the AQE research was that across communities, many individuals liked the combined question approach and felt it presented equity, as each major category received a checkbox with examples and a dedicated write-in space to provide detailed responses. Over the past couple years, our research team has been involved in ongoing dialogues, outreach discussions, and engagement with many diverse advisors, stakeholders, and external experts since the conception of the 2010 AQE research back in 2008. We work with them throughout the design phase, implementation, and release of the results, and continue to now as we make our plans and next steps towards 2020. For example, over the past year, members of our National Advisory Committee met with us to discuss our race and ethnicity research plans, and they encouraged us to continue our research on both a separate question and a combined question approach, alternative question wording, instructions, and terminology, and also the testing of a distinct category for respondents of Middle Eastern, North African, or Arab heritage. Additionally, earlier this year, OMB created a federal interagency working group on race and ethnicity to discuss, research, and possibly make recommendations on important race and ethnicity issues. We also continue a long tradition of outreach and dialogue with myriad racial and ethnic communities, as well as academic scholars and expert researchers. For example, we met with the Arab American Institute and leading Middle Eastern and Arab American scholars, activists, and organizations earlier this year about their request for a separate classification for a MENA category for Middle Eastern and North African respondents. We met with members of the National Council of Asian and Pacific Americans to discuss ways in which we could collect important disaggregated data for detailed Asian groups and detailed Pacific Islander groups. We met with leaders and researchers and experts in the Latino community at a national summit to discuss, sponsored by the National Association of Latino and elected and appointed officials, to discuss AQE findings, race reporting patterns among Hispanics, and also ways to improve data on race and ethnicity. We also met with a broad national coalition of researchers and civil rights experts to discuss the topic of race, ethnicity, and civil rights at a forum sponsored by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And just last month, we met with researchers and leaders in the Afro-Latino community to take part in a panel discussion on the importance of race and ethnicity data and identity for the Afro-Latino population. So today I'm here to share an update with you on our mid-decade research plans to refine our designs for race and ethnicity, which follow upon the successful strategies that we tested in the 2010 Census Alternative Questionnaire Experiment. With respect to race and ethnicity, the Census Bureau has been developing refinements to several key dimensions for testing and improving questions on race and Hispanic origin. These dimensions that you see here on the screen include question format, as we continue to research both the separate question approach and the combined question approach, response categories, where we're exploring how to collect and tabulate data for respondents of Middle Eastern, North African, and Arab heritage, the wording of instructions and question terminology, through examining ways to optimize detailed reporting and to improve respondent understanding of the options to report multiple race and ethnic groups. In addition, we're also testing web-based technology, for example, the internet, smartphone, tablet, and telephone options to enhance question designs and to optimize reporting of detailed racial and ethnic groups. Now, when the 2010 AQE research was conducted, the Census Bureau emphasized that the research strategies that were being tested did not intend to pick the 2020 census question 10 years ahead of time. We also advised that we expected to conduct more research during the decade to build upon the successful strategies of the 2010 AQE in order to make recommendations and determination for the 2020 census content. Our 2015 census test will enable us to further evaluate the separate questions approach and the combined question approach to determine how the questions perform in new web-based data collection methods using the internet, smartphone, telephone, and in-person response options. What you see here are some of the revisions that we're testing. The results and the findings from the 2015 research will inform recommendations to the U.S. Office of Management and Budget on question design format, for example, the separate versus the combined question for the 2020 census. The 2015 test will also evaluate the use of a Middle Eastern or North African, or MENA, M-E-N-A, category. This graphic illustrates an example of one of our research designs where a Middle Eastern or North African category is included among the options for selecting a major race or ethnic category. Taking a closer look, this image shows the Middle Eastern or North African category along with 6 example groups and a dedicated write-in space for respondents to enter their detailed ethnicities, such as Lebanese or Egyptian. The 2015 test will also evaluate the use of alternative instruction wording and terminology for improving respondent understanding of the question and the reporting options. Recent qualitative focus groups and cognitive research found that the instruction to mark with an X one or more boxes is frequently overlooked by respondents. In fact, the research found that some respondents stopped reading the instruction after noticing the visual cue X and proceeded to directly do just that, mark a box, overlooking the remainder of the instruction to mark one or more boxes. We're testing alternative instruction wording to mark all boxes that apply, and also noting that people may report more than one group. This is in an attempt to improve the clarity of the question and make it more apparent that more than one group may be selected. We will also evaluate the use of different terminology to describe the question and the concepts of race, ethnicity, and origin. Recent qualitative research found that the term origin is confusing or misleading to many respondents who may think it's asking about where they originated from or where they were born. 2 alternative options are being explored in cognitive testing this year and usability research, with one approach testing the use of the term ethnicities along with race. For example, print the specified races or ethnicities. The other approach tests the removal of the terms race, ethnicity, and origin altogether from the question stem, the instructions, and the examples. Instead, a general approach would ask, which categories describe this person? Now, the exact terminology to be used for these alternative versions of our testing are pending the cognitive research and usability testing later this year, which will inform the wording that we plan for the 2015 test. In addition, with the advantage of new technology to collect data via web-based designs, we will also be testing a combined question with detailed checkboxes for soliciting detailed racial and ethnic groups. This approach will provide a series of detailed checkboxes and write-in spaces for each of the OMB categories to help collect data for detailed groups. For example, Samoan, Iranian, Filipino, Jamaican, Puerto Rican, Irish, etc. This design example that you see here on the screen emphasizes some of the new options that we're exploring for our internet and web-based data collections. On the initial screen that you see here, a combined question for race and ethnicity collects data on the major OMB categories. For each of the major categories, a checkbox is provided. Examples are shown for the 6 largest groups representing the geographic diversity of the OMB race and ethnic definition. For example, someone may mark that they are Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, and also mark that they were Black or African American, and also mark that they were Asian. After doing so, they would be guided to a subsequent set of screens that collect detailed information. For any category selected, a subsequent internet screen presents several detailed checkbox groups and a dedicated write-in area to collect additional detailed responses. So for example, this screen would collect detailed responses for a respondent that marked that they were Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, offering them checkboxes for Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, Salvadoran, Colombian, etc., with the opportunity to write in more detailed groups on the line below. In similar fashion, a respondent who marked Black or African American would receive a screen that collects detailed responses for specific Black groups such as African American, Jamaican, Haitian, Nigerian, Ethiopian, Ghanaian, etc. And additional screens would collect data for other categories that were selected by the respondent. Going back to our example, for a respondent who selected Asian, a follow-up screen would collect detailed responses for specific Asian groups, such as Chinese, Filipino, Asian Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, etc. These web-based designs enable us to do much more than paper questionnaires, and we believe these new design approaches will help us collect data not only for the broader OMB race and ethnic categories, but also for detailed race and Hispanic origin groups across the country. Finally, this graphic provides a high-level timeline for making decisions on content for the 2020 census. Today, we've announced our plans for content research that will be conducted as part of the 2015 National Census Test. Later this year, a Federal Register notice will elicit public comment on the mid-decade research that we're undertaking. And over the next year, we'll conduct cognitive testing, systems development, and also finalize our plans for the question designs to conduct with the 2015 test. In 2016, we will analyze the results and discuss the findings with stakeholders and external advisors as we prepare to make recommendations to the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. By early 2017, the 2020 census topics must be submitted to Congress, with the final question wording due by April of 2018. In 2019, we must finalize and test our operational and processing plans to collect, edit, and tabulate the 2020 census data. And along the way, as you can see here at the bottom of the timeline, the Census Bureau will have ongoing outreach and dialogue with myriad stakeholders, communities, leaders, experts, scholars, and advisors. And these important discussions and interactions have been and will continue to be paramount in our efforts to conduct the 2020 census. We hope this presentation has given you a good overview of our research plans for the 2015 National Content Test, and we look forward to addressing your questions. With that, I'll turn it back over to our MC, Mark Perry.
Thank you, Nicholas. Now we'll be opening up the discussion to questions from the media first and then non-media. We ask that you state your name and your affiliation when you ask a question. We want to give everyone an opportunity to ask a question, so we'll be allowing one question and one follow-up. Operator, can you provide instructions for us?
Please press star 1, record your name to ask a question. Again, it's star 1, please record your name.
And while we're waiting for questions from callers, bear in mind that our staff can arrange for interviews after the news conference. You can obtain further information by calling 301-763-3030 or emailing us at pio@census.gov.
So far, there are no questions from the phone.
Do we have any questions in the room? Yes. Could you walk up? You can walk up, yes.
My question is about who do you reach out to? So you said earlier this year you reached out to the Arab American Institute. But have you reached out to more, you use the word communities, have you actually done anything more grassroots?
Sure. Is this specifically about the research on the Middle East and North African category?
Right, yes.
Okay. Thank you for the question. We've actually been involved, and I'm going to ask my colleague Roberto Ramirez to come up and join me. We've been involved in a number of discussions with representatives from the Middle Eastern and the North African and Arab American communities. This started several years ago, and it continues. Roberto can provide you with some of the specifics that we've done in terms of the outreach with particular stakeholders. Thanks for the question.
Hello, I'm Roberto Ramirez. I'm the Chief of Ethnicity and Ancestry Branch here at the Census Bureau. So yes, actually we have been involved in talking to a number of key stakeholders from the MENA community. In particular, we actually have been working with the Arab American Institute. We have also been working with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee and the Iranian Coalition and Iraqi Coalition. And we also have been in great consultation with two members of our National Advisory Committee. That would be Akram Khater, a history professor from North Carolina Community, director of the Middle Eastern Studies, and also Hassan Jaber from Dearborn. He's the director of Access, the Arab Community Center for Economic and Social Services. So we have been in consultation with them, as Nicholas said, and we can plan to continue to do consultations. In fact, we are now tentatively planning an expert forum to convene a number of experts throughout the country this spring in 2015 to hear about their views and hear about how we should classify people from this region.
Thank you, Roberto. Operator, do we have callers?
Again, it's star one, and please record your name to ask the question from the phone. The first question is from Olivia Winslow from Dixie. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Please ask your question.
I have one question and a follow-up. First, if you could clarify the tests that are taking place in 2015. So you have the national content test in September, but there are also tests earlier in the year in Maricopa County, Arizona, and Savannah, Georgia, testing various aspects of the internet capabilities. Could you clarify how the national tests would work in conjunction with these tests in Arizona and Georgia?
Yes, thank you for that question. I'll have Jennifer Reichert come up and clarify that.
Okay, thanks for the question. Yeah, as I mentioned, we will have, and as you mentioned, we will have two tests that will have census days surrounding April 1st, 2015. As you mentioned, one in Maricopa County, Arizona, and the other in the Savannah market area in both Georgia and South Carolina. Those tests are going to be focused on very specific objectives related to the census. The Maricopa County test will really focus on our non-response follow-up operations. So those are operations where we have to go out and send enumerators to people's households to collect interview data when we have not received anything through the self-response. We will also have a self-response component to that test, but we won't be testing any real objectives in that part of the test. Whereas in the Savannah site, we will be testing very specific objectives related to self-response. And as we released last Friday, those primary objectives are allowing respondents to respond without a census ID, as well as allowing respondents to engage early in the census process through our Notify Me initiative, which allows them to choose their mode of contact. So if they want to be contacted by the Census Bureau in the future by email or text, that initiative will enable them to come in and register their email address or their cell phone number to be able to be contacted in that way. Those tests will be focused on those parts of the census. The national test that we're talking about here today is really mostly about content and some of the contact strategies that we're using. So they're not necessarily related. However, whatever we learn in those site tests in the early part of the year, we will make every attempt to try to build into any additional testing that we do in 15. But all three of these tests are testing slightly different objectives in terms of the entire census process.
And my follow-up is it a foregone conclusion that the internet will be part of the 2020 census, either in whole or in part, and how will that work?
Yes, right now we are operating under that we will have the internet as a primary self-response option for all respondents in 2020, and that will work by Right now, what our plans are is probably we will do some kind of a mail-out invitation for everybody to respond via the internet, but we will also have, as we always do at every census, an integrated communications campaign that will make the entire public aware of this option, enable them to go onto the website and complete their census through the internet option. Is that? Oh, yes, and yeah, Director Thompson just asked me to remind, if we understand that there are portions of our country that don't have internet access or prefer not to use it, and they will also have a paper option available to them, so there'll be that option as well, but we're going to encourage the public to use the internet to the extent we can.
Are you ready for the next question for the phone?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
That's from Terry and Melissa from the Census Project Box. Yes, good afternoon. How are you doing?
We're doing great, thank you.
Okay. My question specifically relates to the budget and funding for fiscal year 2015. I'm wondering if anyone can comment on the possibility that there might be a longer-term temporary funding resolution or continuing resolution for the entire year, which would not increase the Census Bureau's funding over this year's funding level. And I'm wondering how that process might affect all of these census plans.
Thanks for that question. Director Thompson is coming up here.
So we are working, we understand the components of potential funding scenarios, and we've been doing a lot of prioritization. We've been working closely with our colleagues at the Department of Commerce, the Office of Management and Budget, and providing timely information to the Congress. Right now, we are not in a position to publicly discuss the actions we have, but you can rest assured that we've been doing a lot of prioritization and planning and what-if analysis, which will become available as the budget situation unfolds.
Thank you.
Do-
Please record your name to ask this question from the phone.
Do we have any other questions in the room? No? Operator, do we have any other questions online?
There's no questions from the phones right now.
Alrighty, that wraps up today's news conference. Thank you very much for participating. We appreciate your interest in the 2020 census and in the Census Bureau. Thank you.